Hi there. Today I'm going to be explaining how to visualize your data tables on graphs through the application called Microsoft Excel. Now, I currently have the 2007 version, even though there have been more modern versions that came out. But when it comes to visualizing your data and adding them on graphs, it really doesn't make a big difference. Now, that being said, let's get started. First step is to click your Microsoft Excel tab, and you should get a screen very similar to mine. Now, the only difference being is yours shouldn't have any labels or numbers already added to them. I already added these just for the sake of time, so I wouldn't have to add them later on during the video. But adding these labels and titles and numbers should not be hard at all. Just click an empty slot, type in whatever you want, and really organize your numbers and letters in any way that you want. So A, below it you can have 1, B, you can have below it the number 2, something like that. Doesn't really matter, as long as you know how organizing your data shouldn't be hard at all. And once you have that, you should get data tables that look very similar to this. Now I have two sets of data tables, one being easier than the other, and I'll explain the uses later on. But since we have an easy data table right now, just being here the label and here the number, I'll explain to you how to add these to the graphs. First step is to highlight, so just click on any table and just drag it across, just like that, and you should just click insert, and here you should get these different versions of the graphs. Now these first 5 here, they all work relatively the same way when it comes to making the graphs. There's only very little difference between each, which is probably being like titles and numbering, but other than that, these relatively work the same. So let's click the easiest one, the column, and once you click these graphs, you should get a multitude of different options. The only difference is how they look visually, but they all work relatively the same. So for sake of convenience, I'll click the first one. Oh, and look at that. Here's all the data already being visualized. So, but when we look at a chart, you're just like, wait, what is all this information? So, since we don't even have a title or yet again labeling the X and Y axis, we can always click on Layout. Layout adds the chart. Here's the option that says Chart Title, and you can have it either centered over the graph or above the graph. Now, I prefer above the graph so it doesn't really bother anything or any numbers on the graph, but if you choose the centered over layout title, the title is going to be straight out on the graph, which I find a little unconventional, so I usually prefer the above the chart area. So since you have this part, you can just click it a couple times, clear it out, and give the graph any appropriate title you really want. Just graph seems appropriate. And once you have the title of the graph, you really just have to add the Y and X axis titles. And look at that, axis titles. Top right, top left-ish corner next to chart titles. Once you click it, you get the horizontal axis title and the vertical axis title. Now let's click the horizontal axis title first. You should get two options that says none or title below axis. So obviously you want the below axis title. And you get the same box as the graph title, except a little smaller. You just do the same thing, you label it. So that's education. Alright, that was easy enough. You just do the same thing for the x-axis, the y-axis. So you click the vertical axis part, and you actually have 3 different options when it comes to it. You get the rotated title, which is just the same thing, but like I said, it's rotated. You can get the vertical title, which is just the letters stacked up on each other, or you can get, which is my personal favorite, the horizontal title, which is just a horizontal title, which doesn't break anyone's necks when you're trying to read the sides. So just label it anything you want, yearly income, appropriate to that, and there you go. And you can always expand this a little more to visualize it, and you just click the corners right here just to make it a little bigger so the numbers and the titles aren't so squished together. So yeah, you can always get something like that. And like I said, there's different versions of the graph, so we can highlight them again. You can insert it into a line graph, which like I said is relatively the same thing. It just the difference in look really, and you can always just add titles, axis titles, doesn't really matter, relatively the same thing. just highlight the information again. Pie chart, relatively the same thing. The only difference is you just pick the chart that's most appropriate for your information. I don't feel like this pie chart is the most appropriate for my information, but it still does the same thing. It just compares all the 4 different data sets with each other. And when it comes to a pie chart, the neat little feature you have here is just click it, and you just so like you see little dots appear on the angles, and you right click and you should get an option that says add data labels. What that being is just adds the numbers. Look at that. Makes it a lot prettier so everybody knows what the colors mean, because there's a legend right on the side, and it actually shows the visual representation of the numbers being presented on the graph. So easy. Now the data is still highlighted, so we can insert it into the bar graph, which is literally just a flipped version of whatchamacallit, the column graph. No big deal at all. Relatively the same thing. You want to add titles, chart title, axis titles. Now we can add the area graph. Like I said, different versions, all relatively the same thing. They all look very similar. Now, as you can see, this is just a pretty much just a filled in line graph. No big deal at all. Just like that. Boom. Looks exactly the same. If you want to add titles, layout, chart title, axis titles, same thing, same thing. Now, the difference here is the last graph, the scatter. Now the scatter works not very different, but a little different compared to these previous graphs, because first you're going to have to define the y and the x-axis. So that's why I made this chart separate, because it picks the far left column here as the automatic x-axis, and all the information to the right of it is going to be the automatic y-axis. So I'll show you that right now. First, you just gotta highlight all the information that you need up to the labels, not really the title of the graph, the chart. So you just highlight all of that. You insert to scatter, different forms, relatively the same thing, but I like picking this one because it's the most visually pleasing for me. And boom, you get it like this. This little data table here is comparing the distance covered. Let's say you're throwing all these different items off a building, and it shows how much distance they covered. And like I said, they all work relatively the same way, but the only difference is this column here is the x-axis, and this column, every column after that is going to be the information for the y-axis. So it's comparing 3 different lines, and you can always do the same thing like I showed you in the bar graph. Just add chart title. You can do something like that, the overlaid one or the above the chart, which I find the most appropriate. Axis titles, boom. Horizontal titles, title below axis, boom. You can always make it bigger. Now if you always want to, redesign yours, you can always just add different colors to it, different color schemes. And if you always want more options for design, you can always click more, which is right down here. This should just, this is the more option, so there's a lot more of that. You can pick any of these features to make your graph just any more prettier than you already want it to be. So boom, if you like it like that, then that's fine too. In the end, the data is still all the same. And if you're probably thinking, wow, this is such a tiny little place to put a graph, even though you can stretch it and whatnot, it's still a tiny little graph. So you can always click this option right here, move chart. Now the move chart just expands your graph in a way, and I'll show you. First, you have to click the new sheet little slot here, and here is going to be what you're going to title your document. So the title of your document, it could be like something appropriate, like I said, graph. And once you just click OK, boom, you get your graph just a little bigger. And once you have that, I believe I've showed you everything appropriate when it comes to visualizing your data through Microsoft Excel. Like I said, this is the 2007 version. Now you can have more modern versions than that, but in the end, like I said, they all work relatively the same way when it comes to graphing your information. So I hope I was some help for you, and have a nice day.